Got my stuff on.
Hey, good morning.
All right, there, I got you. I can hear you now.
Good,
One reason
good.
why
How are you,
if
Jamie?
I put music on my speakers, on my computer speakers, I have to turn it down to like 9. Last everybody.
I mean, we could do with some pre-meeting tune. It sounds like it would be fun. Hey, good morning, RJ.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Thank you for being here. Hey, Dietmar, good morning.
Hey.
Hello, Mary. Hey, Sam.
Morning.
Let's see, good morning, Chris. Good morning, Ken. Hey, Ronnie. Hey, Major. Hey, Lindsay and Ann. Hello, Donna. How's everybody doing this morning?
Great.
Good. Good. I'm glad to hear it. I see we have a Nicolette. Can you hear me? We can. Congratulations again, Nicolette. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Earl. Hey, Chuck. How's it going?
Hello. Good.
Good, good. Let's see. Good morning, Matthew. Good morning, Tina. I apologize if I'm missing you. I'm trying to go through all the names on here.
If you hover towards the bottom of your Zoom screen, does the share option pop if you, with your mouse?
Hey,
Yep,
baby.
yep, yep. Okay, good.
Hey, Devin. Good morning, Ren.
If you want me to.
Yeah.
And everybody, as you start to come in, if you could put your name in your organization and the parish that you live or work in the chat box, that would be great.
Yeah, but it just, anyway. Well, the thing is started.
Welcome, Dr. Maselli. Welcome, Jerry. Good morning, Steve. Thank y'all for being here.
Hi, Rochelle. Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. I apologize. I'm going to be on my phone for just 1 second and make sure I get the correct information over to an individual. Okay, everybody, good morning. Hey, Ross. How you doing?
Well,
Good, good. Welcome, everybody. If you haven't already, please put in the chat box your name, organization, and the parish that you live in. We are going to go ahead and get started because we do have a full agenda this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, make sure that we are getting into today's presentation.
good morning.
Lag time. So thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank y'all for joining us today. This is the Louisiana Watershed Initiative Region 7 Regional Steering Committee meeting for September 1st. My name is Rachel Sanderson, and I work for Capital Region Planning Commission as the Region 7 Regional Watershed Coordinator. Just as a quick note, today, this is a public meeting, so it will adhere to Louisiana open meeting requirements. It is observable to the public. Any chats made in the chat box are considered a public comment. We do have a public comment period that is towards the end of our presentation today. It's about 10 minutes. And we will be recording this meeting. So you'll see that there's a little recording icon on your desktop as well. We will have meeting minutes that we will send out at the end of the meeting as well, or a few days out from the meeting. I shouldn't say at the end of the meeting. We'll do roll call in just one moment. Before we do that, I wanted to announce a couple of roles on today's call. We do have Alex Carter with the Office of Community Development, who's going to be providing us with some information today from OCD.
No other.
And if I got some folks, if you could mute, that would be much appreciated. And for my co-host, if you can go through and mute some people if you hear them talking in the background. We might mute you perhaps with love, but you can unmute at any point in time. If you have any technical difficulties, please place a message in the chat box. If you haven't already, state your name, organization that you're with, and the parish that you live or work in that chat box. And so back to the roles. We have Alex Carter here today and Evelyn Campo with OCD. We're going to have Dr. Thomas Doucet, who is with LSU, who's going to be presenting some information on Governance 101. We have Lindsay Lamana, who is a graduate assistant at LSU, who's going to be taking notes today. We have Kim Marusik, who's going to be helping facilitate some of our root cause analysis discussion as well. And we have Dr. Maselli, DOTD, and Dewberry on the call as well to give us a brief overview of modeling updates as well as data management. So also two more roles that are really important. We have on the call Ross Liner, who is the chair for the Region 7 Regional Steering Committee, and Chuck Berger, who is our co-chair, or vice chair, excuse me. And actually, I'm going to let Chuck take over here. For those of you who are able to attend the Value Vision Goals workshop on August 19th, thank you. I'm going to let Chuck take it from here and give us a brief overview of what that meeting was like.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Good. Well, good morning, everybody. So some of the things we took away from our vision, values, and goals workshop was that, number one, in Louisiana, we live with water. Our economy and the environment are closely tied to water. Our diversity in our culture and industry is all based on water, and our culture is rooted in water. Everything in Louisiana revolves around water. Our food, our music, our culture, our lifestyles, our industry. So one of the things we noted that we wanted was inspiration as a result of innovation, education, preservation, and collaboration. People identified there's a necessity for differing opinions and points of view, and we have a lot of diversity with opinions and points of view within the state. One of the things that came out was there's some maybe misunderstanding about the design year storm terminology. When somebody says a 500-year storm or a 100-year storm, technically speaking, that's something that's supposed to happen once in 500 years or once in 100 years. But reality, you could have a 100-year storm 3 years in a row, or you could have 3 100-year storms in 1 year. It's I guess the important thing to note out of a design year is it's a statistic. It changes as you get more data. So every year we have more storms and new data. So that design year storm will change. We want to collaborate and exchange information, but all of the items that we do will be benefiting low to moderate income communities as well as, other communities. And we want to base our decisions on good science and data. So that's it.
Thanks, Chuck. We're going to have more on this coming out soon. We're working on a post-meeting document. We had to consolidate about 18 pages of notes into that too. So stay tuned for that. It will be coming soon. Thank you so much again, Chuck, and to everybody else who participated in that discussion. It was really robust, and it gives me a lot of hope and insight into where we're going in this region. So today we're specifically going to be identifying and discussing elements of governance structures that will be led by Dr. Thomas Dusitz, and we are going to identify and discuss key concerns and root causes for flooding in Region 7, and that'll be a facilitated discussion. For today, we are already going through our introductions and meeting logistics. Then we'll have a brief modeling update. We will go into Governance 101, the root cause analysis discussion. We'll have a public comment period, and then we'll close out the meeting for the day. So we've already heard just a little bit from Chuck, but Chuck and Ross, if y'all had a couple of words that you wanted to say prior to us getting into the roll call today, I think it would be much appreciated.
I do. This particular meeting was canceled because of last week. We had tropical storms, we have hurricanes coming through, and we need to keep people in Eastern Texas and Southwest Louisiana in our thoughts and prayers. This is something that I lived through during Hurricane Katrina. I was in Lakeview in New Orleans, lost my home. So I know what it's like to lose everything, and it weighs on you mentally and physically. So if anything we can do to donate time, money, resources, clothes, anything would be, just helpful for that region. Like I said, I'm sure many of us on this call has similar experiences. And I think this highlights the need for resilience, and really appreciate everyone on the call today. So, thank you.
And difficult, and so that is definitely one of the keys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ross. And we really are thinking about our friends who are impacted, our friends and neighbors who are impacted, especially in Southwest Louisiana, and basically riding the Texas line. Chuck, did you have any words that you wanted to say before we get started today?
No, I just want to thank everybody for taking their time out to help us with this important topic.
Perfect. Thank y'all so much. I'm going to take us through roll call. As your name comes up, can you please go off mute and let us know that you are here? This is for our steering committee members and/or their alternates. If you cannot go off mute, just put it in the chat box. So we'll start in alphabetical order with parishes. Ascension Parish. Do we have Mike Enlow and/or Ron Savoy on the call?
Good morning, Mike Enlow's here.
Hey, Mike. Good morning.
Morning.
With East Baton Rouge Parish, do we have Tom Stevens and/or Fred Rayford? We have Tom Stevens and/or Fred Rayford from EDR with us today. I see Fred actually coming into the room right now. So welcome, Fred. That was perfect timing. I'll mark you down as here. Do we have James Stewart and/or Joni Stone with East Feliciana? All right, we don't have them today. What about John Clark with Iberville Parish? Okay. What about Mark Harrell and/or Steve Kistler with Livingston Parish?
Steve Kistler's in attendance.
Hey, good morning, Steve. Thank you for joining today. Do we have Major Coleman and/or Jeremy Williams with us today for St. Helena? Oh.
Major Coleman.
Hey, good morning, Major. Didn't mean to skip Earl and Stephanie here for St. Charles. Do we have either of y'all on the phone?
Earl's here.
Hey, Earl, sorry about that. Do we have Ryan Donahue and/or Ryan LaRouche with St. James on the phone? Okay, I know that our friends at St. James had made their way to DivRitter to help with efforts for post-disaster for Laura, so we might not have them today. Do we have Devin Foyle and/or Renee Pastorek with St. John today?
Good morning. This is Devin Foyle.
Good morning, Devin. Thanks for being here. Let's see, and we've got Ross. We heard from him already. Thank you. Do we have Bridget Bailey and or Melissa Cowart from Tangipahoa on the call with us?
Bridget, I'm here. You guys hear me?
Sure can. Good morning.
Good morning.
We have Bobby
Hi, I'm here as
Breland
well.
and or
This
Alex
is
Summer.
Missy.
Oh. Hey, Missy. Nice to hear your voice. What about Bobby Joe Breland or Alex Sumrall with Washington?
Hey, Alex is here.
And Ken
Good morning,
Weedall.
Alex. Hey, Ken.
Good morning.
What about Gary Migo and or Emily Cobb?
Gary's here.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you. Dietmar Richier with Amite River Basin Commission.
This is Larry. This is Larry Bankston, also here for Dietmar.
Hey, good morning. And then we've heard from Chuck already. Karen Zito or Diane Baum with Home Builders Association of Greater Baton Rouge. I saw Karen on the line earlier, so maybe she had to step away for a moment. And then Ronnie Carter and or Kim Coates. Do we have y'all on the line?
Yes, Ronnie Carter here. Good morning.
Hey,
And
Ronnie.
Kim,
Good morning.
I'm here too.
Hey, Kim.
Hey, Kim.
Nice to have y'all. Okay, well, I do believe that we definitely have a quorum, so we will move on from this. Thank y'all for being here once again. We're going to get a quick modeling update. So what we're going to do is get kind of an update and a meet and greet situation from some folks at DOTD as well as Dewberry. So we'll do an introduction to the modeling team. We'll also introduce y'all to the model data management team members. And we are going to also, after this meeting, be sending out a statewide H&H modeling FAQs. This is specific to our region. It will be updated with more questions that come from across the region, but I'm going to send that out to our regional steering committee members later today. And then for folks who are not on that particular mailing list, you'll see this on our website, likely under the resources tab, as soon as we have a chance to upload it. So I'm going to go ahead and toss this over to, I think maybe DOTD or Dewberry. So if y'all can come off mute.
Hello, good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning, Rachel. My name is Jigu. I work with DOTD and work with Ian Chua Hang. He had done a lot of technical and coordination work for this program, and he's on sick leave today, so he couldn't attend this meeting. So I'm here introducing myself and our program. Nice to meet everybody. It is my very pleasure to take this opportunity to represent DOTD for our current progress for this program. Right now, we are in the final stage of reviewing the consultant's proposal to our task order 1. Task order 1 is basically data collection and data gap analysis. We are in the final stage. Once it's been done, and we'll be ready to issue the notice to proceed our task orders. Once that started, we will need more coordination from DOTD and to the local municipal local governors to collect for the data collection and data gap analysis. We need more coordination when the task order starts. And as you all know, Dewberry has been selected for the Region 7's modeling team. And Dewberry is very good company. You all know they have successfully modeled the Amite River Basin, which is very good model and has been applied to many projects. And that's why we selected Dewberry. They are good at modeling and they are experienced in the surveying, and they also good at stakeholders engagement. So we totally believe Dewberry will do the job we need for this modeling program. Anything else, or I can give control to Dewberry introduce?
That would be great. Excuse me. Thank you so much for being here. And we do send well wishes over to Ian and hope that he gets to feeling better soon.
Thank you. I really like Region 7. It's used to be, I used to be the regional engineering manager for DHH's Region 2, and it coincides with the Region 7, exactly.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize that. So glad to have you. So glad to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And who are our folks with Dewberry, if you want to introduce them and see if they can say a couple words.
Thanks, G, for them kind words. So I'm Sam Crampton with Dewberry. I'm the project manager for the Region 7 modeling team, and I've also got Jerry Daniels here who can introduce herself in a second. Yeah, I've managed a bunch of large-scale modeling projects like this before, including the recent AMEET project, and certainly see a lot of familiar faces here on the call that I've worked with over the last few years and even before that. We're really looking forward to getting this going. We've got a strong team put together. Some of our partners include Fortum Tablada, who are going to be doing our survey, as well as working with a lot of you guys on the call here for outreach and data collection. And then we've also got FTN on our team, who's our dedicated QA/QC reviewer. So we recently submitted our task order 1 proposal for the data collection and planning. And I know G and Ian and them have been reviewing that. And so we're looking forward to getting that going. And I guess, are you still on the line, Jerry?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Some of you I've met through the years living and working here in Region 7. We're very happy to be a part of the team and to be assigned this region for the modeling effort. We're very excited to get started. We are, as Sam submitted, waiting to hear back from DOTD on everything being final and approved and signed, sealed, and delivered. And we are looking forward to getting started with our outreach strategy. What we're thinking of doing is having a webinar for everyone in each HUC-8 within the region, just to sort of give them an introduction, go over the overall goals and expectations of the project, but then also sort of let them know that we're going to be going back at the parish level, and as well as the communities within the parish, to start those data requests. So the initial webinar would just be this overall overview to let them know, like, these are the types of data sets that we're looking for. And then within 2 weeks of that, we would follow up at the parish and community level with the meetings to actually make the requests and talk to folks. So as soon as we can get all of our contracting done and underway, we hope to start that data collection outreach very soon.
Great, thank y'all. We're certainly lucky to have you. So regional steering committee members, please know that people will be reaching out. Oh, I'm sorry, somebody else?
Yeah, I want to make a comment. I'm with the DICMAR, with the Amite River Basin Commission. We are very marginally involved in this modeling. We don't hear from nobody. We are the Amite River Basin Commission. Hold a second. And so it would be very nice if we knew what really is going on. I know they're working on the DOTD. Furthermore, have anybody contacted City Parish? They are doing intensive modeling for East Baton Rouge. It seems to me to address this, all these agencies needs to be contacted beforehand so that everything is coordinated. And I see Fred right there on the screen. I don't want him to talk. What I believe is very important for us to know what is going on. I have been very aware of the DOTD modeling, obviously, from the very beginning. We are one of the first ones that started this whole banner waving thing about modeling and regional approaches. But I believe some effort needs to be made of what is out there in the field right now. I hope I'm not missing something here, but I just want to say that.
Yeah, I think Dietmar, what you're saying is right, and I think that y'all in particular, as well as Many of our parishes and municipalities have a lot of local expertise. They've been doing this work for decades in some cases. What I heard just now from DOTD is that they're waiting for the notice to proceed to come out. So I think maybe perhaps that some of that outreach will start to take place once the NTP has been approved and they can move forward with task order 1. I don't know if our friends at OCD or DOTD have anything to add there, but that's my understanding, is that they'll be reaching out really soon.
Yes, once the task order 1 started, all the existing models, all the modeling efforts will be researched and organized and be used in our model. That's the question. We are not going to waste any previous modeling efforts.
Right, and I would just add to Deepwater, we're just as anxious as you are to make those contacts and get that coordination going, and that's a huge part of this work that's under this notice to proceed. So we are very anxious to do exactly what you're talking about, and we're excited to be at that part in the project.
Rachel, I was going to mention a little bit about where we are EBR. I just will tell you that we are moving forward with our modeling for East Baton Rouge Parish. Just as Dietmar had indicated, we got a lot of our information from the Corps, but also we've done some extensive modeling of the information and also we'll be working with Dewberry to try to get their stuff of the Amite River and the Comid, so we can kind of look at what things happen in our parish when we have certain rain events. More importantly, I think if we're going to look at this as a region, it is my opinion that while we may have data, but if we're not sharing that data or at least trying to see what other parishes are doing to accomplish the main goal is to reduce flood risk, then we're spending a lot of money to maybe just serve one parish or 2 parishes. I just think if we're going to look at it as a region, and that's what I think our goals and objectives should be, that's something that I think is critical, and that once we need to look at one model, not 4 different models, because that creates other issues that deal with, but we also got to be sure all the components that impact each parish or each region is incorporated in that overall plan. And I think, you know, we're moving in the right direction. But I have to tell you, my people, my residents in my parish are not going to wait on the region. We're going to look at what we're going to do for East Baton Rouge Parish. And with that being said, we're very, very, very mindful that whatever we do or whatever improvements or whatever mitigation efforts that we come up with, it will be discussed, and we work very closely with DOTD. But just as important, you know, we're going to let the other parishes know that, because we do not want to create a problem downstream. And that has been one of my biggest goals and objectives, is to try to help improve our drainage through our parish, but also not at the expense of our downstream neighbors. That's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Fred. You know, we don't want to create a impact our neighbors downstream. I think that encapsulates a lot of the sentiments within this program. And certainly we don't want to hold back parishes and municipalities from doing really great work. So I think in terms of what you were talking about with sharing that information across the region through our parishes and municipalities, I think you're spot on with that, Fred. We are going to have to move on from this particular topic. For the sake of time, y'all, we have a packed agenda today. So one last thing that we wanted to do in terms of modeling is we wanted to introduce the model data management team members. So let's see, I think we have Dr. Maselli as well as Dr. Habib on the phone. If y'all want to introduce yourselves and your team and any efforts that are going on right now.
Good morning, everybody. This is Ihab Masalhi with Tulane University, and I'm part of this team, the model data management team. And I do believe that Dr. Habib and also Brian, Miles, and Liz from UL, they are also on the call. And I just wanted to say a couple of things about this effort. It is an important component of the program, and we definitely will work closely and coordinate with you to determine, and the intent of this work is to determine the most sustainable way to actually use, update, and store the models in the short and the long term. And we would like to coordinate closely with you so that we can understand the needs, your needs regarding utilization of these models. Our work is supposed to end at the, or conclude by the end of this year with providing recommendations. And these recommendations will include the approach to store and maintain these models, the required resources to stand up this housing and maintenance program in terms of personnel and modern software. And these recommendations are going to impact your consideration of the governance and the related model and data storage needs, the authorities, and the processes involved in that program. We are just starting, and the intent is to keep you fully engaged and updated throughout this process between now and the end of the year. And we will be working with the watershed coordinators to keep this group informed. I'm going to ask Brian or Liz if they have anything else to add to these comments.
Oh, hi, this is Brian Miles at UL Lafayette. No, Ehab, that was a great introduction. Just want to add that we're looking forward to reaching out and talking with everyone and learning.
All right, back to you.
Perfect. Well, thank y'all for thank y'all for joining today. I know that we could spend a lot of time having conversations about this specifically, and I'm thinking about some ideas in the back of my mind where maybe we could do some one-to-one Q&A and things of that nature, or get some other questions answered, because our steering committee definitely is interested in the work that y'all are doing. So thank y'all for being here. For the sake of time, we do need to move on. And so I think up next we have Governance 101. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we will have Dr. Doucet take over control on the slides. There we go. Looks like it's working out. Okay. Want to do a quick audio check, Tom? Make sure that we can hear you.
Yeah. Just hold it.
Oh.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Tom Stevens.
Yeah, Tom Stevens.
Great.
Thank you, Rachel. And hello, everybody. It's an honor to be able to talk with you today. My name is Thomas Doucet. I'm an assistant professor in the College of the Coast and Environment, Department of Environmental Sciences at LSU. And I focus on questions around regional governance of environmental issues from a legal and planning and policy standpoint. So compared to our colleagues at Tulane and ULL, this is going to be a somewhat more philosophical conversation, a little bit about what kind of organization or what kind of considerations you might want to have in mind as you set up your watershed coalition or your watershed organization or organizations in terms of what is governance within a watershed organization concept? What are some concepts, which I'll call the 4 R's of rules, resources, relationships, and reporting, that you might want to have in mind while you're designing the structure and decision-making and rules of your organization? I'll give some cases and examples of how this plays out in different watershed coalitions or watershed organization models that address flooding and also integrating flooding and water quality from different states and metropolitan areas around the country. And then we'll finish up with some brief conclusions, and if there are questions and there's time, I'm happy to answer them. So in terms of watershed governance and organizations, I really want to anchor this in this idea that there is a governance structure to your watershed that exists kind of as an emergent property, that exists as how all the diverse actors in the region, the engineering firms, the municipalities, the parishes, the state agencies, the federal agencies, the private actors, how everybody interacts kind of creates a governance structure. And within that, that's where the capacity to adapt and to govern issues such as flooding your watershed lies. And the idea of a watershed organization is to be able to positively influence decisions and behaviors between that diverse group of people that are governing the question of flooding and hazards at the watershed level.
Hey, Tom.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Tom, do you think that you could maybe like full screen the presentation? It's just a little bit hard to read. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go right ahead.
Are you not full screened? Okay. Are you seeing?
Go
now?
under, if you go under display settings, you can swap presenter view and it'll should be correct.
Okay. How about now?
Yes.
That's better. Thanks so much.
Great. Sorry, guys. So, you know, what we know is in this region where friends are going to be doing the modeling, we have, I think, 12 different parishes, 45 municipalities. So we have a huge amount of, just at the local government level, of stakeholders that are making decisions about land use, about infrastructure. And we're doing it across an area where there are maybe integrated population centers that cross those borders, where there's integrated and shared infrastructure for transportation, where there are shared flood hazard risks, as we addressed last week, where there are shared resources, maybe for detention, for green infrastructure and wetlands, and that the sort of governance network, which I'm sort of put this unrelated social network on top of, sort of lies on top of all that. And the question to some extent is, well, where is this new regional governance organization for watersheds going to fit in to that structure, and how's it going to try to influence it? So just some considerations. We'll get back to this sort of philosophical theme. That watershed governance challenges include problems such as socio-ecological fit, the problem that the scale of the watershed or the scale of the flooding you might have in the region, whether it be riverine, pluvial, or storm surge flooding, isn't always well linked to the scale of some local decision making. Sometimes that's fragmented, as we were mentioning. Data might be in different hands. It might be collected in different ways. This can lead to knowledge gaps, but we can also just have knowledge gaps about the issue in general. There are questions of uncertainty, of different parties having divergent interests, of the tendency to compete for scarce resources and funding, and many others. And these are things that are inherent in every watershed and in every environmental sort of management issue. And they're questions that different watershed organizations try to address. Now, what I want to point out is that in part that the governance decisions that you are making as a team over the next few months should in part respond to what are the goals or things that you expect to change in the governance systems around watershed and hazard management in the region, and that your governance structure and mission should reflect that. And we know that if there's not institutional change, it's hard to affect the management of these problems that happen at the watershed scale. So way back in the 60s, they were talking about a statewide drainage program based around watersheds. I think that was not ever fully implemented. We know that the Louisiana Constitution in the 19th century already included questions about multi-jurisdictional levy districts, right? So this need to collaborate and to create organizations and institutions that have the capacity to incorporate that is not something new in Louisiana. And a question, though, is that the organizational governance structure should fit tractable pathways to achieving goals. And what might those be? Developing a management system, cultivating new leadership, organizing outreach campaigns, influencing policy regulations, providing technical and financial expertise, some type of shared land use authority, plan coordination review. I just mentioned these as potential capacities or goals that the organization might want to consider, or that it'll be selecting from these and many others as it sets up its mission and its future. And to have in mind that the way that the structure of an organization is, whether it's a citizen or a municipally led or a parish led or a mixed type of organization, is going to should respond in terms of organizational design, in terms of what the goals are, and also what the realities in the region are. So what are some elements of success from the literature in terms of governing watershed organizations? Well, one is, are they able to develop human capital? That is the internal capacity, the internal knowledge, the internal expertise to address the challenges presented at the watershed scale, either with water quality or stormwater and flooding management. Are they able to build social capital, the ability to get people to move towards collective goals, to promote collective action? Do they have a clear policy framework? So going back to the other slide, have they really selected what their goals and objectives are? And then they have a clear financing framework, right? Is there an organization that has some financial capacity? And that can be manifested in different ways, whether it be a recurring allocation to the organization, whether it be taxing or millage authority in some cases, whether it be a coherent grant or fundraising campaign, otherwise another capital campaign. And so these need to be reflected in the organizational design, or at least considered. And some initial considerations here from the sort of conceptual level that I'd like to propose as useful as you start to set up your coalition and make decisions about its representative structure, about how maybe it'll be incorporated, about what areas will be involved, about who will be involved, about what types of committees it'll have, are questions about the rules of the organization, governing it, but also considering the rules in which it operates, the capacity of that organization, how do you build it to have strong relationships across the region, to bridge those jurisdictional divides, to bridge those divides between subject matter experts and hydrological engineers and communities, to build resources, so to have that human capital, to have that organizational capacity, and then a reporting and evaluation structure in order to provide accountability for the organization. And I think that building these in purposefully from the beginning will lead to a stronger watershed organizations or set of watershed organizations for the region. So with rules, what do I mean? Well, I mean, how is the organization incorporated or chartered? There can be different types of watershed organizations. Some of them are citizen-driven membership organizations set up as nonprofits or charities or 501c3s. Some of them are set up as civic groups. For example, a watershed organization based around stormwater and flooding, similar to something such as the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation. But maybe they're organized under a state charter or along with an environmental regulatory program. So here in the region, we do have chartered basin organizations such as the Amite Basin Commission. And also there's a question of whether or not that watershed organization is going to be operating under a state statute around the stormwater or watershed management provisions that it's implementing, or whether it's going to be relatively autonomous for the region. And this is important because, well, the type of organization and its structure is going to be reflective of whether or not there's a statewide or a metropolitan water management or floodplain statute. So states, for example, and we'll give you some examples with Minnesota that have those statewide statutes, their watershed management organizations tend to have certain types of structures that really do focus on maximizing the input and control of local stakeholders who are basically local counties in those states, what we call parishes here, and municipal actors. So do they have a role in the regulatory process? Are they going to be managing or facilitating formal agreements among jurisdictions? Is participation voluntary, or is it sort of set up as a mandatory or almost universal framework? So these are all considerations about how the organization is and what capacities it's going to have. And we have different types of watershed organizations. We have models that are citizen-driven, primarily composed of private citizens. Now, these organizations often exist in the water quality and environmental advocacy realm, but we'll see from Colorado, many of those organizations have been incorporated into their hazard management strategies recently. Is primarily an agency or jurisdiction or locality-driven process. So something like MPOs, where you have parish representatives, you have local jurisdictional representatives, and the important goal really there is to get all of the local governments on the same page and working together. Or is it some kind of mixed organization that tries to get private citizens and government decision makers into one single forum? So these are just some considerations there. With resources, you know, I've been doing background research on this topic, and I found the really surprising academic insight that watershed groups have been found to be more successful when they're well funded. Now, I know that will surprise all of you. But the question of funding and what the organization is going to need for funding long-term is important, because you don't want to set up a organizational structure or models and goals that are going to require necessarily a large amount of funding for the long term if you're not sure you're going to be able to secure that, because you might set up an organization that is not sustainable. And so there's a question of, well, are they going to be able to obtain external funding? Is that going to be through millage, taxation, issuing debt, through grants, through other mechanisms? Is there going to be local, regional, state funding? For example, in Minnesota, there's a Clean Water Legacy Fund that helps support many of their watershed organizations. And just keep in mind that the funding structure has to do a lot with the organizational mission. And if it's a more planning or resilience-based organization, well, maybe it's more grant driven, but that might mean that it's less stable. But if it has a more regulatory mission, then there might be a need, or long-term planning mission, then there might be a need to create stable funding flows. And then that really goes hand in hand with staffing. And, you know, we know that human resources are at the core of everything that you guys do as professionals in this field, and that the stable staffing, as we'll see, is really important for the relationship building. It allows for trust building, local relationships, for building up expertise, for creating institutional knowledge in the region about managing and governing watershed issues. There's also questions of, well, technical components to be managed in-house. If they're going to be managed externally, how does that work? And the management structure might also consider the nested structure of watershed management. What I mean by nested structure, what I mean is this question where you have, and this is an image from an article by Sales and Baggio, where you have really different scales of action, from the hydrological unit, 12, very small watershed, all the way up to HUC 6s or 8s, where you have local and regional decision makers, both in infrastructure systems and in political systems and in policy systems. And you have different domains of knowledge. And so it's important to think about relationships with the organization, both in terms of how it's going to interact locally, regionally, with state actors, and also with federal actors. And also horizontally in terms of public-private relationships, managing the difficult balance between human-driven needs and human-driven perspectives and scientific knowledge and data, managing discussions across stakeholder groups, and also importantly, I think, especially in these times, is to consider within the context of stormwater and watershed management for flood hazards, is how will the process engage traditionally marginalized communities and many of the low income or minority areas that tend to suffer the most and have the most trouble recovering from flooding damage and problems with watershed management. Also with these relationships, I think it's important to consider scale. Now, the literature suggests that many project level decisions, infrastructural decisions, are well suited to scales that are maybe similar to a HUC 8 scale. But oftentimes civic and local networks are more coherent at HUC 10 or HUC 12s, that's smaller scales. So people don't relate necessarily across the entire watershed in the same way that they do at their neighborhood or smaller jurisdictional level. And so it's the question is, well, then how do you incorporate these larger scale infrastructure priorities with how people are relating with each other, which might be at a smaller or more local scale? But also, as we'll see in some of the examples I give you, when you're dealing with a regional approach, then you have the question of the metropolitan structure. And this question of, well, let's say everything is split up among HUC 8s, but the parishes are in different HUC 8s, or maybe the metropolitan area covers different HUC 8s. And so there are examples where the watershed management is scaled up to fit that larger multi-jurisdictional structure as well, where there are commonalities. And finally, with these sort of concepts, we have reporting and accountability. And this really has to do with what I'm sure you all are practice in your daily lives as professionals in this area, the need to be transparent and set up accounting and public reporting processes. And this has to do with setting up within your institutional structure processes for measurable goals and objectives, to institutionalize or schedule publication of reporting and evaluation, and to make sure that your reporting is public facing and systematic, and to create mechanisms for preventing how decisions, policy changes tangibly affects, for example, the H&H models. I'm not saying necessarily it would have to be something like that, but that would be one consideration to make. And so this leads to a basis to evaluate organizational learning and to create and build public accountability. And so what we had there with the rules, resources, relationships, and reporting are some consideration in terms of the need to set up an organization that matches the scale of your problems and objectives, that has resource building capacity to address those objectives and at the scale that they present themselves, that it can build up relationships to work around those questions at the regional or watershed scale. And then it has a way to clearly and transparently demonstrate accountability. So let's go over some cases and examples before we wrap up. So we know that in Louisiana, we have existing bodies and institutional structures that deal with this. You know, we have gravity drainage districts that they can be created sub-municipally, although they can band together and create joint district. And an interesting thing to consider about these gravity drainage districts is that they're really driven with a representational structure around local property owners. So they're very locally focused, oftentimes around specific infrastructure in a segment of a parish. Now this is a district from Livingston Parish that I just put up there as an example. But there have also been special legislative created districts with larger mandates around larger infrastructure and public missions. Now these are, for example, the Emmy River Basin Drainage and Water Conservation District, the Atchafalaya Levee District, and we have many examples of those across the state. So some of these structures already do exist in Louisiana, but there's a question of maybe bridging gaps and asking, okay, well, within these, what can be added on and what can be complementary to what we already have in terms of building strong governance at the regional level in terms of rules, relationships, resources, and reporting around stormwater drainage and flooding questions. An example I wanted to give you of an agency-driven watershed organizational model is from Minnesota, and they have a long-standing watershed management approach that is originated around water quality, but also includes now flooding and stormwater. There are, from state law, there are grants of planning and regulatory authority for watershed issues and also taxation powers. But we'll see that many of these watershed organizations are set up in strategic watersheds within the state where there are specific interests. However, in a metropolitan context in Minnesota, they have what are called watershed management organizations that are governed by the Metropolitan Area Surface Water Management Act, which sets out water management organizations that cover the entire metropolitan area. So if there are smaller basin organizations or coalitions, those are rolled into the superstructure. Well, why do they do that? Well, they do that because they need to coordinate activity around watershed management. They need to coordinate infrastructure at this regional scale. So Minnesota chose to give authority and coordinating power to these more metropolitan structured organizations. So in a rural area, you can have a part of the state that maybe doesn't have a watershed organization, but in a metropolitan area of Minnesota, all the watershed management things are coordinated under these watershed management organizations. And just to look at the smaller watershed scale organizations from this perspective, well, they have rules that incorporate them and give them a grant of authority. They have defined organizational mandates, in this case through state statute and law. They have some regulatory powers to adopt rules to conserve and control the use of water resources within the district. They have contracting authority. They have staffing authority, which you don't necessarily need a state charter for that. Just a simple incorporation would do. They have resources through the ability to tax, contract, apply for grants and funding. They have a structure that is based around building relationship with counties. They have rules and responsibilities and reporting structures. And then to build relationships with the community, each watershed district is required to have a citizen advisory committee to provide input to the managers on projects and activities. So their board is county driven, locality driven, but they have this structure to build community relationships through their community advisory committee. Iowa is a very different model to Minnesota, and it's about organization under a technical assistance framework. They have something called the Iowa Watershed Approach, and it involves a statewide process, much similar to what's happening in Louisiana right now, to create watershed and data systems to support local decision makers. It doesn't come along with any necessarily mandate to form a coalition, but they do provide funds for joint scenario planning around the flood control models, around GIS models, and they give support to watershed plans. They do not have taxing authority, but they do focus on linking intergovernmental decisions with scientific data and also support from state agencies. And there's some similarities with the Louisiana Watershed Initiative there. But what will we say about rules? Well, when I make these statements, it's not that I'm saying that any rule structure is important. It's just that we need to be cognizant of the rule structure and its consequences. Well, the water management authorities in Iowa, unlike Minnesota, for example, do not have taxing authority. And the implementation is based on their persuasive value of the plan and planning processes. So, for example, if you thought that was what this region needed, well, you could take an approach such as Iowa. This resources, the state provides data and staffing support for scenario building, but funding is largely local and grant or county or municipally provided. So what each watershed organization in the state is going to have funding-wise long-term is going to be really independent. And so there's going to be, I think, a range of outcomes of what happens in Iowa. And you can see in Iowa, there's still large parts of the states that don't have these water management organizations. The boards are mostly composed of subject matter experts and government representatives. Unlike Minnesota, where they have these community advisory committees, Iowa really hopes that it's the planning process that allows for more community outreach and engagement. Reporting happens through annual updates, and it's very linked into this Iowa management data system. Again, looking at a metropolitan example, you have the Colorado or the Mile High Flood District. And now, I hope it shows up clearly on these slides, but what the image on the left depicts is the several county area around Denver. So sort of in the top left, you would have Boulder, which I think is about 40 miles from Denver. Going down the, I think, I-70 corridor there to the far southern and far eastern suburbs of Denver. The airport would be in the middle upper question. And so their flood district is metropolitan. It's given statutory authority to adopt and enforce floodplain regulations. But in practice, it has worked in a much more consensus-based and collaborative model with the local jurisdictions, although they always have the sort of potential to have the stick to overrule local jurisdictions that might give them authority within the region. They have funding via local governments, grants, and a regional millage. Their board is, again, local and county government composed, but they do many things to bridge out and build relationships from the sort of focal stakeholder group of the local decision makers and local government authorities and the staff and experts in the area through a stream management academy, through diverse digital activities, through outreach, and through other committee structures. So here you can see really within this larger regional drainage district, they have many different roles, and their roles have evolved from their origins in the 1960s when they were basically just based around floodplain management and infrastructure to a much larger role where they have staffing capacity and have a strong presence in watershed master planning throughout the entire Denver metropolitan region. Another example from Colorado is Colorado Springs with the Fountain Creek Watershed and Flood Control and Greenway District. Now, this is in many ways a very similar structure to Denver, although it's actually built around a watershed geography, not necessarily only a metropolitan geography. And I wanted to point out this group because its rule structure is set up to have different relationships and information within its decision-making and within its capacity. Again, because they have regulatory powers, they have a board that's mostly representative of county and municipal interests, but they are supported by a permanent and staff-supported citizens advisory group that has an outreach coordinator, as well as a technical advisory committee that makes recommendations regarding studies and issues within data collection, reporting, and project selection. And I mentioned these in terms of designing the structure of the Watershed Coalition, but also if these bodies are going to be set up within a Watershed Coalition, I think it's also important to consider, okay, well, how are they going to bridge and make relationships in the regions that are going to further the goals of the organization? And also, are there going to be resources to support these bodies? And what can you do purposefully to create resources to create relationship building bodies within your organization in terms of its design? Another example from Colorado, and this was that after some flooding, I think in 2013, they created the Emergency Watershed Program and the Watershed Resilience Project Program. And what that was something where they took HUD funds, CDBG recovery funds, and they gave it to, and they said, watershed coalitions, okay, we'll work with us on watershed planning at the smaller level and work with us on project prioritization. And so it was a collaborative model in terms of constructing recovery projects to some really catastrophic flooding that they had in Colorado about 6 or 7 years ago. And it had short-term success on individual projects supported by the broader capacity building. Although, and an interesting thing here is they built on existing watershed coalitions, many of which existed because of the prevalence of environmental advocacy in the region. Although if you're going to adopt this type of structure, you should consider, okay, do we have the existing structure and organizations in order to build something on that's citizen driven in the way that they did in these watersheds under the Watershed Resilient Pilot Program. So they really leveraged existing environmental groups in an area of high environmental engagement. So, if you also note that this is a relatively high income area with high amenity values outside of Boulder and Denver. So some conclusions from all of this and some takeaways that you might consider over the coming months as you engage in this exciting new effort to set up a new watershed coalition for the region is, well, who will appoint your board? What powers or roles should the coalition fill? What is the current governance context that you'll be operating in? So design based on the reality you have, not what you hope to have in the future. Be grounded in the present. We operate under a state regulatory structure or a special statute. What are geographical and interest group considerations to consider when creating a representative structure? Should it be nested where you have different committees or boards per HUC 8 or HUC 10 or HUC 12 watersheds, or in some other way that you might deem important? Resources. How will you build an organization that has stable and sufficient resources to achieve its organizational goals and objectives? Will they be staffed internally or externally to the organization? That is, will your organization basically be a board that relies on external staffing and resources for expertise and implementation, or you have internal staffing and capacity? What structures and strategies can help do that? Will the organization be created with a stable funding stream, or will the need to look for external funding and grants be something that should be built into its design from the beginning? And what you think your relationship, your resource future is, should also influence, well, how ambitious and how complicated your organization is, right? If you have a more uncertain long-term funding stream, maybe set out with an organization structured around understanding those limitations from the beginning and maybe how to build from there. But if there are potential for larger, more stable resources going forward, well, maybe you can structure that to build up staffing capacity and to build up organizational capacity sooner. And this has to do with relationships. So how can you include diversity and engagement in your structure? How can you build in voices that are not necessarily floodplain managers, engineers, local drainage directors? Those are, of course, the people with the most expertise and that knowledge, but the stakeholders for the issues you engage with are really everybody. You have subcommittees with jurisdictional representation, technical representatives, social group representatives. How do you want to build relationships through the structure of your organization? Will there be built-in staffing and outreach as part of your mission? And how will you do that at different geographical scales? And especially rolling in the question of, well, how you manage those questions along with H&H models. Finally, something that I think is often overlooked when organizations are created is, well, how can you build in reporting and accountability into every one of your structures and plan from that from the beginning? So how you measure the success of project implementation, how you measure mitigation, collaboration, to have goals and stable institutionalized reporting structures for each one of your goals. And this will lead you to have a transparent strategy and hopefully a publication strategy. And I know I've covered a lot, and I think I've gone over my time, but I want to thank you guys for the opportunities. I think we'll probably publish these slides. My name is Thomas Douthit. My email is tdouthit1@lsu.edu. Feel free to write me if you have any questions or concerns. These are some of the citations and resources that I use in compiling this presentation. And with that, I will stop sharing and pass it back to Rachel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. It was a wealth of information, and I found myself learning many things along the way. And I think we are kind of a little behind on the agenda, but I think it's important to open it up to maybe 1 to 2 questions if people have any. We'll adaptively manage the agenda as we go, and whatever we don't cover today, we can always cover on the 23rd. So does anybody have any questions for Dr. Douthit? Okay, well, I'm hearing none. So feel free to keep those questions in your back pocket or to think on them a little bit longer. We certainly have time in this process. So I'm gonna go ahead and get us ready. We're gonna pass it over to Alex Carter as soon as I can get this to present. All right, I think we're ready to go. You ready, Alex?
Yeah, I am. Thanks so much, Rachel, and thank you so much, Dr. Douthit. I think there's one piece that I want to focus on, and we want y'all to think through, is these tractable pathways to achieving your goals. And I think this first exercise is to really narrow in on what that means for y'all's region. And so thank y'all for having me. If we want to keep moving, thanks, Rachel. So again, this is about getting from A to Z, quickly and efficiently as possible. We realize that flood risk in Louisiana is not going anywhere. It affects the whole state. In that way, Louisiana is very unique from Minnesota and the other states that we talked about, and you can see that in the way the Watershed Initiative approaches these issues as a statewide issue. And so, we look at this in these 3 buckets, right? There's a scientific and modeling evaluation component with the models. We have to look at watershed-based planning objectives and what y'all want to achieve, but then also see these existing organizational boundaries in your region and think through how they can be utilized, how they could be expanded upon. And it's not about creating new institutions if we can really work with what we have more efficiently to achieve those goals in the long term. And the idea is we have to do this now, right? We have to start now and get there relatively quickly, because there are consequences to not continuing to move forward. We're going to see that repeated history continue to play out. And so what we want to do in this exercise today is really overview how that's going to work. We want to make sure we're all looking at this comprehensively, not just about what we're going to do today, but how this is going to play into a larger plan, how your recommendations will be formed and then refined, right? We don't expect to get all of this right the first time. We see this as adaptive. So today we're going to go over the work, right? The things that are missing that need to be done for the region to address its flood risk more effectively in the long run. And that's going to stem from an analysis of the known issues that we talked about in y'all's last presentation related to the flood risk discussions and the Esri storyboard. So we want to take those issues, think through the root causes around those issues, and then identify those gaps, start understanding what is the work that we need to do to be able to address those gaps more effectively, and then think through the roles, responsibilities, and authorities that may be attached or attributable to those so that we can make that progress. And we'll spend some time with questions and next steps. And Rachel, I think, is going to handle most of the facilitation. I'll just be providing this first overview. And if y'all have questions, always feel free to reach out to watershed@la.gov. We always monitor that and are very responsive. All right, Rachel. And if I'm going too fast, y'all use the participants icons to tell me to slow down. I want to make sure we don't spend a lot of time talking. We do a lot of time talking with y'all. So if I go too quickly through this, just let me know, Rachel, and I'll slow down. But we really want to start talking about governance today, really digging in, and I think we're doing that. And I think we just heard a really compelling reason and a lot of reasons why this is important. We want to make sure y'all have a good understanding of the work that's taken place in Louisiana related to this. There's a lot of work. And so please do refer to that regional watershed management governance, that exercise briefing book. It spells out all the research in Senate Resolution 172, 39, the research looking at threat-based districts, the research that went behind pulling together these provisional watershed boundaries that y'all are working within, and sort of sets the stage for where we are today. This is not a decision-making process that has happened overnight. In fact, it's happened over a decade or more's worth of efforts related to all those who came before us, and we have to sort of give them their due, I think, in making sure that we build on those efforts and acknowledge all that important work. The regional capacity building grant that y'all are working in is the next step in this research and all these recommendations that have come before us. And it has isolated these main goals to kind of keep us moving towards these long-term visions. We know we have to build staff in each region. We know we need some recommendations for regional governance structures for watershed management. And we think that one way of doing this is to establish these watershed coalitions through the work of the steering committee, through y'all's work collectively in Region 7. And so how do we do this, right? I mean, I think we often get caught in talking about all of our problems and not really thinking enough about what are the tangible steps that we need to take problems, to think about those root causes, and to figure out what the solutions are so that we can move forward and start realizing real progress in our flood risk profile. And so today, what Rachel's going to really spend time with y'all on is what is the work, right? Look at these issues that are coming out of these flood risk discussions. What are the core issues that are driving most of these problems? If we can identify those core issues, if we can find solutions to them, then we'll have rippling effects in reducing our flood risk at a regional level. This is one of the aims of the regional work, of the Watershed Initiative. We really need to make sure we maximize our effectiveness, how we use our dollars. And so this is one piece. Is what is that work? What is the things we need to do to move this forward? The next exercise after today is really this big question of who does it. This is a hard one. And we're prepared to talk through all the entities in your region, to share that information with y'all, to build on the work that was just covered. and really make sure we capitalize on all the expertise, the knowledge, and the experiences that are in your region and the capabilities, and build consensus around this solution in the long term. And then after that exercise, we need to really think about how, right? Looking at all these case studies really illuminates the different pathways each region could potentially take and the trade-off associated with what authority or processes or accountability or reporting you end up choosing to embark on. And so we really need to think through how this could work, what are those trade-offs, and then think about what are those action items that we need to undertake to implement, right? So if we want a state statute, if we want something more locally governed, or there are items that we need to identify and then hit the road in executing those so we can continue to move forward. All right, Rachel? What we are going to do as well, and we're going to take some of this work that Dr. Doucette went through just now, and we want to make sure that everybody feels really comfortable in this process, understanding case studies, thinking through the pros and cons of regional approaches to watershed management, that this is complicated, right? We don't want to rush into it. And so we're going to be providing another sort of optional governance webinar that really unpacks what we know about previous research, that takes that briefing book that I just referenced in the SR 172 and the 39 and all this good work that we're building upon, and unpacks it a little bit more for all the regional steering committee members, so y'all feel really comfortable moving into the questions of who and how we do this. And so we'll be doing that in October, and I invite all of y'all who are feeling a little overwhelmed to join us for that, and it'll help you, get through this. We've got to do it together. All right. And then I think we all need to collectively think through, like, what happens after our recommendation, right? We absolutely need to identify how we implement them. But we also need to make sure that everybody knows about this process and that y'all aren't kind of on a ledge on your own participating in this singular process without this necessary stakeholder engagement within your region. And so one of the things the state is working on right now with your watershed coordinators and the watershed coordinators throughout the state is to think through making sure we have that vertical alignment and the horizontal alignment. And so at this point, once y'all make recommendations, we're thinking by the end of the year, around November, January, we're thinking that we're going to call these provisional, right? That they are sort of temporary, because we think that this is going to require some outreach and engagement to make sure y'all feel as comfortable as possible and your stakeholder groups understand and feel part of this process, so that when we get to a final recommendation, you have a very robust understanding both within your own organizations and across the region. And so one of the things we'll be working with your fiscal agents and your representatives of your steering committees is sort of an engagement strategy from January to April to take those recommendations, introduce them to your stakeholder groups, and really get their feedback, and summarize that information, really engage, and come back to this group in May and June and present that, right? Y'all should know what people are saying, how people are responding to your recommendations, and be given an opportunity to say, you know what, I agree with that. I think maybe we do need to tweak this. Or, you know what, we think we had it right from the start, but we're glad that they've engaged and provided their input, and we're better prepared to move forward with our approach, knowing how people feel about this or that. And so we really want to make sure this piece is robust, that once we make the recommendations, we acknowledge the work isn't done. We need to ensure support and overall that y'all fully understand all the implications associated with what these recommendations are given a chance to refine it, and then feel very confident moving forward in May and June and adopting those as final before we bring them to the Council on Watershed Management. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Rachel at this point, and she's going to go over, I think we've talked about this already, Rachel, and I don't want to waste time reiterating it unless you think you want to reaffirm where we're at.
Thanks, Alex. We got a lot of work to do, y'all, but we do, if you notice in the timeline, we do have a couple more months perhaps to do that work. So good news on our end. So for today, we are going to be reviewing and prioritizing regional issues, as Alex had just mentioned, with the goal of identifying root causes for those issues. So I'm going to keep my screen like this because we're going to be doing a little bit of magic and taking notes and at the same time. And hopefully those begin to appear as Kim Marusik, our Director of Planning and Capital Region Planning Commission, helps to make sure that those notes are transferred over into other slides. So this is where our moment for getting and collecting feedback happens. If I can get it to do what I need to do. There we go. Okay, so during the July 28th conversation that many of y'all participated in, we started to identify regional flood risk concerns. And I think that in some cases, it actually went beyond just the regional flood risk concerns in terms of flooding. So we'll open it up for discussion now. Regional Steering Committee members, you received that after action memo that kind of tried to condense and consolidate all of those notes and comments from the July 28th meeting. So if anybody wants to kick us off and get us started with, what do you think is one of the largest regional flood risk concerns?
Could I say something?
You sure can, RJ.
This has to do with the composite from the good work that I've heard reported over the last several minutes. And I feel very strongly about this program, as you know from our communications, but I have sent a document to your office that details some elements of expanding this and how to perhaps address some of the technical sides that I hope will get some attention, and I hope very much to be able to pursue that with you. In spite of the good things I've heard here, I find some lackings. For example, I'd like to talk to detail and scope just briefly from a different angle than what we just heard. But in terms of detail, the Water Institute was established with one of its objectives to prevent another 2016 flood, the Great Flood. It is my judgment that that will not happen. I think with the Darlington as it's going now under design, a great engineering structure, but I think that another 2016 would readily happen. I think this puts us greatly at risk from the standpoint of protecting people as well as legal risk. I can demonstrate, if you will, with a figure why I think this is the case, or I can simply let these words stand as they are. What is your preference?
Well, I think RJ, if you're gonna share information that's not going directly on the slide right now, let's hold back for the public comment period, which will be from 11:15 to 11:25. Did you have anything to add to this in particular?
I'm gonna interrupt here. I think basically what I'm wanting to talk about has to do with the direct challenge of what we're proposing as the scheme for limiting Amite River flooding. I think that's our fundamental challenge here. And the other is I'm going to suggest that we expand our palette to consider other things relative to flooding of our grand state, because this is our fundamental challenge. Now, you put that wherever you like, ma'am, but I'd like it to be heard today because I think it's significant that we talk about that.
Yes, I agree with you, RJ. For the focus of time and for just to be respectful of time here, if possible, we can have that discussion during the public comment part of today's conversation. Right now, we need to focus in on getting these regional flood risk concerns squared away. Is that okay? That'll be from 11:15 to 11:25.
It's your control, ma'am. I just told you what I need. I'll stand by.
Thank you. All right, what about our regional steering committee members? Do y'all have particular items that you want to add to this? A couple of things that are highlighted in the after action memo are, you know, I think heavy rainfall, backwater flooding, saltwater encroachment due to rising seas, as well as other factors, fluvial flooding outside of the floodplain. Are there particular things that you want to add here? Y'all are being shy today. I might have to call on some people.
This is Chuck. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, what you got to add, Chuck?
Well, looking at the memo, the action memo, after action memo, I'd gone through it and made some notes. The pluvial flooding that was mentioned is also, it happens a lot in the Baker and Zachary areas where it's just flat and the water has nowhere to go. So I'd say pluvial flooding. Just from my experience working here in downtown Baton Rouge, when we're getting really heavy rain, we have what we call the dancing manhole covers. So that urban flooding scenario is an issue.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by dancing manhole covers, Chuck?
Well, obviously there's the intensity of rainfall was such that it overburdened the system. So well, that's what it would appear to be, and the collection system is overloaded, and thus water's coming out of the manholes.
Thank you.
Rachel? Yeah, this is Margie. I'm just wondering too about focus on development in areas that is especially in the 2016 flood areas, which are all areas that are being heavily developed now, with a lot of people moving in thinking it's nice, high, dry ground, and some kind of focus on where will development go that will cause less problems, that isn't going to add to the problems we already have.
Thank you, Margie.
And I think with that,
Major Coleman.
Hey, Major.
Hey, I'm going to speak from my parish, and I'm not that familiar about how the region are handling things, but in my parish, our sloughs and our natural drains are not regulated in a sense where when we move dirt or cut timber, we are not, and we don't have the resources financially to regulate this thing, and it'll probably help us with our flooding if we could keep those drainage clean out and regulate when someone when someone buy a piece of property or something and they try to get it ready for to use it. They may have a natural drain running through the property, and they close it up so they can use the property. And we, as a parish, have not done a good enough job at all of regulating that kind of stuff. When we cut timber, we're real rural out here. When we cut timber, a lot of times the timber companies, they would put brush and logs in our natural drains for, just to cross over to get to the timber, and they may leave that there. And I think that's a problem. And then when we have storms, we don't have the capacity to go and check our natural drains to make sure they are open after a storm. So I think that'll be something that we need to look at, maybe regionally. I know in St. Helena we have those issues.
Thank you, Major. I'm trying to capture this. So the natural drains are not regulated in the sense that when we move dirt and cut timber, it creates brush and more. We need to keep the drainage clean and maintain resources for regulation to maintain natural drainage and make sure after storms that those are clear. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And there's somebody else trying to also talk. Hey.
Hey. Slightly different issue down here in St. Charles, and I know St. John too. We have storm surge and wind-driven high tide, you know, that are real issues for us during hurricane season. So.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Earl.
Hey, Rachel, it's Ross.
Hey, Ross.
As far as the regional flood risk concerns, I would like to maybe mention a gap in technology use across the region. You know, whether it's in, let's say, our 3 parish region of Tangipahoa, Washington, and St. Tammany, you know, if we could have some kind of river, bayou, stream gauges that are electronically monitored, so we can, you know, find the data in real time and share it amongst ourselves in the region, then we could see, you know, how, I guess, how the flooding is working, or, you know, is detrimental to the region itself. So maybe just some technological increases. So that's a concern, is that we don't have that technology readily available.
Yeah. Thank you.
Matthew Allen. One of the big concerns is that the continued development with the large fill projects for subdivision stuff will end up politically forcing destruction of these natural river systems at the major expense to the taxpayers. Where if more appropriate development was done, instead of slab on fill, raising homes or on piles or what have you, we could avoid a lot of future headaches with trying to control the floods.
Thank you, Matthew. I heard continued development with fill projects for subdivisions and destruction of natural river systems in the reference to tax dollars.
Yeah.
Something else that may go along with that is that and it may be part of it kind of references the solution, is perhaps incongruent planning.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Can you, are there a couple of things you want to add there to what you mean by incongruent planning?
Well, I think as most of these things, I like all of the things that are being listed, but most of them are best addressed on the front end in the planning.
Thank you.
So there needs to be, I guess, a sort of a regional planning approach to development.
Thanks, Chuck.
I would say a lack of public understanding of these fill requirements really does increase the flood risk, because from a planning perspective, if we even try to write a draft ordinance that is introduced to council, a lot of people might not understand that that's a negative thing, and they will vote it down, so it doesn't really matter.
Rachel, this is
so I'm going to, oh, go ahead.
Hello? Rachel.
Hey, Bridget, how you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I just kind of wanted to just piggyback off of what Ross said about having some gauges to do some collective, collaborative planning. I think that is very key. I also agree with Matthew in regards to some of our planning initiatives, because I think that being able to gauge what water is coming downstream to neighborhoods and communities is very intuitive, especially if we know from the standpoint of what Chuck said about some of the incongruent planning in the past. Maybe our drainage standards were at a lesser value for certain neighborhoods where we know this water is about to inundate, and we know their drainage capacity can't handle that, but we won't know that if we don't have those gauges in place upstream. I think the collaborative planning for the neighbors that are adjacent parishes that share streams, really we do need to have more of a collaboration with each other as our neighbors to each side, east and west and north and south of us, for that very purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Bridget. So I have understand what water is coming downstream. I consider old drainage standards compared to new understandings based on collaborative planning and gauge network data. Does that sound like it captures what you were just saying? Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Thank you.
Rachel,
All right.
I'm seeing a few comments in the chat. You want me to just read those out for the group?
That would be fantastic. Thank you, Evelyn.
Sure. I see one from Ren Clark, need to control impervious surface area and changes to lowland terrain through fill. And I see one from Honora Burris, conversion of natural floodplain habitat, forests and streams to developments with huge amounts of fill and concrete, relying on drainage ditches and detention ponds that make matters worse for adjacent or downstream land. So definitely, it seems like both of these are focusing on kind of a change in the landscape from like a natural retention function or a natural floodplain function to a developed area with concrete.
Thanks, Evelyn. And I saw one that was sent to me privately, I think maybe perhaps on accident. It also said building commercial and residential and marshland smart comprehensive land management template needed in decision making. So thank y'all. I think that speaks to exactly what you were just saying, Evelyn, changing the natural floodplain areas to developed areas. Do we have additional things that we want to put on here, y'all?
Hey, it's Earl. I'd like to mention one more thing. I know
Sure.
we're having to address it here in St. Charles, and anytime you talk to a national organization about flooding, granted it's on a much smaller scale, but this is something that maybe should be approached in a regional level so that the entire responsibility isn't a municipality. The infill of houses in older subdivisions keep creating issues inside of those older subdivisions. You got new FEMA standards, you have new building standards, and those infill lots, while they're creating small problems, if you add them up in a neighborhood, they're creating much larger problems, including those natural drainages that may or may not have drainage servitudes on them.
Thank you, Earl. So what I'm hearing is that the infill of houses in older subdivisions creates issues inside of those subdivisions as we have new FEMA and building standards. Infill lots create small problems at the lot scale, but bigger problems at the neighborhood scale, especially if they don't have drainage built in.
That's correct.
I have a couple that are similar to that, if I may.
Sure.
Floodplain projection perhaps could be reviewed and monitored more regularly because of what Earl's talking about. Often see cases where new subdivisions have a different level of build-to than, let's say, a prior subdivision. And I think as we continue to grow, this projection needs to be looked at and try as best we can to forecast our future needs so we all live together above water instead of having some, by virtue of growth, get submerged later on. I do see some changes in the floodplain projections in some building areas. The other one is it's a local control about water drainage. Some communities, let's say, have the authority and the dollars to, let's say, clear out and clear their drainage structure, but it may be drain into a new or adjacent parish. And if that's the case, obviously sometimes the little city can't do any more, but they're hampered because the adjacent parish doesn't reciprocate and take the water. So coordinations of that nature would be critical. That's self-evident, but it doesn't always happen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great points. I'm seeing. Oh, y'all go ahead. I was just going to read out the chat when you're ready.
This is Matthew Allen again. Another big concern we have is studying the interbasin overflow that happens during major flooding. Like an artery, Punter River will flow over into the Thames River and vice versa, and I think that's been studied very well.
Thank you. Here we go. You said interbasin overflow during major flood events, and we need more detailed studies. It cut out on my end for just a moment.
Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. Okay, y'all. This is a long list. Is there anything else that we want to add before we move on?
Yeah, I got a couple of items.
Sure.
It's Chuck. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay, so I don't think backwater flooding has been specifically mentioned. That's very prominent in this area. Another thing too, I think is a good basic understanding of hydrology, or maybe a lack thereof. Sometimes that, again, sometimes it's not the need to rush water out as fast as possible. Sometimes the solution may be to hold it back, let it soak into the ground, that sort of thing. Our approach in the past has been to let's rush it out of here as quick as we can.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And I think I've heard you talk about this in the past, but more natural floodplain management tactics. Does that sound in alignment?
Yeah.
Let me see, I'm going to check our chat here. Donna, I did put your comment in here, and I do see as well from Enora, lack of planning for larger storms or increased flashiness of rainfall with climate change. Thank you for mentioning that, Enora. I know in particular for our folks who got some coastal areas, those rising seas are also a huge concern. Let's see, from Ren, we cannot immunize the continents and the oceans against our, oh, this is a nice quote, okay. We cannot immunize the continents and the oceans against our contempt for small places and small streams. Small destructions add up, and finally, they are understood collectively as large destructions. And that is a quote from Wendell Berry. Thank you for sharing. Okay, y'all, I think we've got a list here. I have 3 full slides. I am sure that this is not totally comprehensive. For the sake of time, we'll go ahead and move on to our next item, which is where I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen and kick it over to Kim so that she can share hers so that we can start talking about some of the root causes of those concerns that came up.
All right, everybody. Sorry, I have a lot of technology happening on my end, and I don't have great technology skills, so bear with me. So I think the point of this second phase of the conversation is really to start talking about the why. So why do we think some of these things are happening collectively? And I think in the conversation about talking about concerns, I think we also touched on some of these why conversations. And so it could just be a matter of kind of consolidating some of those comments. And Rachel, if you wouldn't mind dropping the third slide, I created a blank one. If you could drop those comments into the third slide, that would be helpful. So if we want to focus, I guess we can just take these one by one, and we may end up having duplicate causes, and that's okay. But we'll just go ahead and start with issue number 1 in terms of the need to limit the Amite flooding and Amite River flooding and flooding overall in the region. And that's a really big why. There's multiple reasons for that. So if we want to just start talking about why we think that is a concern and what has led to that concern, I can start recording those comments.
Let me start, since I'm with the Amite River Basin. The basic problem in the Amite River Basin is simple. Well, simple. It's very logical why it floods. Where does it flood? Where is the impact? It's not where it floods. It's where the people are in the basin. That's a big distinction. The Baton Rouge area is in the, I say, middle of the basin, north-south, or a little bit below that. That is where the loss is. That is where the people are. The water is coming from the north. which is very little development. So that is a big distinction. So to do something is how do you reduce the flooding in the metropolitan area? And all of what has been said today, all of those are solutions. Some are structural, they call it, and some are not structural. A lot has to do with planning, and we have a long way to go on that. But that is the basic issue in the Emit River Basin, is where the population is. And that is true in almost every basin that you have in this region 7. If you look where the population is and you see where the water is coming from, they are not in the same location. We have to distinguish also major floods and local floods. In other words, it's the backwater is primarily caused by, in our case, the big rivers, the Emit and the Commit. Those are the ones that get the national news. But then the other ones are localized drainage problems. So those have to be addressed by the locals, but they will take care of the smaller floods. Two different things. And so I just want to clarify. I want to say one more thing about the Emit River Basin Commission. We have one of the most extensive gauges on the Emit River. And they are all connected with the United States Geological Survey in real time. We got on our webpage, USGS and their webpage, people can see that. They can see what the gauge is, the reading of the gauges as a flood approaches. And so many people might not remember this, but we do have an extensive gauge system. I just wanted to say that. But I wanted to make a distinction in all of this discussion. Remember, the geography has a lot to do with it. Where the population is and where the rain falls in a watershed. That's about all what I did say.
Okay, thank you, Dietmar. Anybody other comments about number 1, or do you want to go ahead and move on?
I could add something to what Dietmar has said if you would like.
I'm sorry?
RJ, I could say something relative to what Dietmar has talked about, if you like.
Sure.
I think the Emit River Basin is getting increasingly important because of the increased settlement below it. We all realize this. I think that we have long focused on what to do about that. Comey Diversion Canal was one and still is in the works, but we need something more. Now, DOTD has put together the Darlington Reservoir proposal, which is a fine engineered structure. But as I mentioned earlier, where that is located between there and Watson gives you over 300 to 400 square miles of Emit River Basin that will allow another 2016 flood to happen, as well as some far greater than that. And so I think the LWI had as one of its objectives to stop the next 2016 flood or prevent that from happening. What we're doing right now will not do that. For that reason, I have proposed, and we can talk separately, it's a separate add-on to that technology that I think would be not only superior to protecting our people from Watson and Denham Springs and so forth, but it'll also help protect us from a legal liability if we do not do it. Because I think, for obvious reasons, this sort of flood condition can and will occur again. And it won't take long for people to realize that we did not make a suitable stop or prevention or control of that. So that's the main, that's the main reason I would like to talk to that subject. Yeah.
Okay, and I think what you're kind of getting to, Mr. Saucier, is talking about some solutions. And I think where you kind of want to focus this conversation is still, we're not to the solutions yet. We're still trying to drill down and to figure out why we think some of these things are happening currently. And then the next phase of this conversation will be taking these causes and talking about what potential solutions might look like. And some of those may be structural solutions, some of those may be coordinated solutions, planning solutions, regulatory solutions. But I think right now we're trying to just make sure we are all in agreement on the whys of what's happening right now in the region. So thank you for your comment.
Very well. I'll bring it up again whenever you're ready.
All righty, thank you. So moving on to kind of the conversation about the fluvial flooding, I think 2 and 3, maybe even 4 kind of go together. Does anybody want to take a stab at kind of the whys around this flooding, lack of water flow, development in areas where it will not add to additional flooding problems? Do we have any comments on addressing these whys?
I'm Ronnie Carter, Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation. I'd like to discuss one of the root causes of flooding. You know, when a family wakes up in the middle of the night and there's 6 inches of water in their floor and it's rising, and that fear sets into that family, that started in a planning committee somewhere that approved that house to be built there. So I think it's that one of the leading causes of flooding is undereducated planning committees, who, you know, most of those planning committees are made up of people of the community there, and they're just citizens. They don't know anything about flooding. They're just put on this committee and they're told don't disapprove anything or you'll get sued, which is really bizarre. But I think that having a resource or even a training class for people who serve on these planning committees, stop the floods before they ever begin by staying out of that floodplain, perhaps. So an education program for people who sit on these planning committees or parishes, I think would be very, very instrumental in stopping a flood before it ever starts in a house.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. Any other comments related to local decision making and some of the challenges we see with local decision making?
This is Matthew. I tend to agree with Mr. Carter. St. Tammany, though, our planning commission is starting to take more seriously the flooding issues in the parish in terms of development. I'm hoping it goes forward. But as far as the root causes, we just live in an area that gets a lot of rainfall and storm surges from hurricanes. Between the terraces that are really relatively flat, when the rivers overflow, they have a lot of area to spread out in. And so we have 3 types. We have the local rainfall that causes the flash flooding that people deal with their cars and subdivisions. Then we have the more damaging riverine floods that come down a day or 2 after the heavy rains. And on top of that, we also get the storm surge from tropical systems coming up from the Gulf.
Let's not forget Region 7, the uniqueness of Region 7. That is the lower part of these basins are all discharged into Pontchartrain and Morapan, basically. Meaning that fringe of land, basically, I-12, generally speaking, Mr. Carter probably knows better than I do on that, is that during certain occasions, during storm surges, hurricanes and even storms, the area is impacted by that southeast wind tremendously, storm surges. That is in that region as important as the riverine water coming from the north. When the two collide in that region is what causes, you know, this tremendous amount of inundation, where actually the water goes from one watershed to the other. The watersheds in that general region, the ridge line, if you want to call it, is imperceptible. You cannot almost see it, it's so flat. So that requires a completely different strategy and solutions than in the northern part of the basin, because they are primarily impacted by riverine. But down there, below I-12, generally speaking, it is a very complex problem. It happens only when you have the two coming at the same time. When the crest is coming down, and coincides with the surge coming from the lakes, worst scenario possible.
Okay. Yes, that is a major issue. Thinking about kind of this issue related to, I think we had a lot of comments related to local regulation, and we touched on some of that. Do we think that one of the root causes is related to local development standards in general? I understand the issues related to the decision makers, and they're making decisions within the framework of the regulatory context that they have locally. Does anybody want to talk about the impacts that may be related to local regulation? Or any other issues really? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I mean, just, I guess kind of vaguely, yeah, it's hard to, I guess, pass stricter local regulations when it comes to floodplain management without a better, I guess kind of how, was it Ronnie? I can't remember, but how he was saying that it's just hard to pass anything without, you know, people knowing about water or really being educated by it. I mean, even though we're surrounded by it, we talked at the very beginning of this meeting about the meeting that we had previously about how water is a part of our identity, but really we don't exactly know how it works, especially when it comes to local regulations and building regulations and things like that. So I think that when you do have stricter regulations trying to come down the pipeline, they get blocked because, you know, sometimes they raise prices for home building or things like that, and that's what are forefront of people's minds. Maybe not the longer term benefits of what, you know, how they can reduce flood risk.
I'd like to add, hello?
Yep, go ahead, sorry.
Kim, I'd like to add to that, just with us, we have instituted some stronger regulatory oversight, and I think there's some growing pains with that as well, because now we have new standards that are applied to current development. I think sometimes the impact on existing structures and homes and neighborhoods feel the brunt of that at times. Again, it kind of goes back to that. If they were designed for a 10-year rain event and they're downstream of one that's supposed to be a 100-year rain event, but then we've got tidal surge, as they mentioned earlier, that pushes those tides up, and then you've got water coming from north. It kind of sandwiches those other developments that are at the lower standard that are going to consistently be our repetitive flooding potentially. So I look at it as we put new perimeters in place, maybe it's going to be protective factors for what's coming forward, but it's still not alleviating or going to give any relief to those that are repetitive flood victims in our lower lying areas in our communities. And it just looks like it's exacerbating things the more growth we have, even though we have these higher standards. Those that were built at a lower standard requirement, they're not seeing any benefit.
So what you're saying is that the public support for higher standards is not as strong because not everybody feels the benefit. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, we may have some outcry for stronger regulations, but it's sometimes the regulation, it may be a little too late. But I also look at it as maybe we have to think outside the box and look at what are the concepts for some of these neighborhoods or communities or subdivisions for retrofitting. And if they were at a 10-year event, rain event, then what's the probability of helping them meet the current standard, which is 100-year rain event, or redesigning their capacity in that respect? If there's vacant lots or other areas to expand in that respect. And again, that's another new regulatory aspect to say where our standards says if you have to do any kind of modification or change to a development and you come forward asking for review and approval from a planning or zoning commission that maybe contingent upon having that approval, you have to meet the current detention standards. I think there's room for growth in that aspect for new standards, looking at older developments that we may be missing.
And I think one of the other things, we talked about some gaps in technology, this issue related to monitoring. Do we have any thoughts about what may cause those gaps in the monitoring network?
I'm not sure monitoring gaps. Could you?
Which looks like gaps in technology used across the region, gauges that are monitored, sharing data real time. I'm kind of looking at this question or this comment here, and understanding what some of the causes of those, I guess, inter-regional communications about stream monitoring, I guess is what that question is, what that comment's getting to.
Yeah, Evelyn, I mean, that's a good start. I read an article in ARC User a couple of years ago in this system that they have in North Carolina. I'd be happy to share it with you, Rachel and Alex. But yeah, you're right. It's about coordination. It's about setting these systems up and money. So I think that's basically it for right now, to keep it short.
Okay. I was waiting till somebody would say money. That hadn't come up yet. But I know that's an issue.
You're doing a lot of things work with money.
Give you a scale. I just wrote a purchase order for just the equipment, not the installation, for 7 new stations here in St. Charles. Which, yes, we're going to do our best to try and share with everyone. But just to do 7, we spent about $85 grand on equipment.
That's a lot of money.
As he said, it is dealing with money.
Okay.
Could I say something?
Sure.
I think one of the things, without being crude in terms of causes, is dancing around here, and that is we don't have adequate technology to address our needs. And I think we need to push harder on that. That's self-evident. The other thing is something I've wondered about. These horrific natural events are so expensive. Great Flood of 2016 was, I think, something like $15 billion. If we want to talk about hurricanes, and I would like to later, as Mr. Lanner has just referred to, Katrina was $265 billion. These are huge dollar values that we can, in reflection, spend more on prevention than we have in the past. Not only do we better protect our people, but we actually find an economic benefit if we would look at it that way. I know it's a big bite sometimes, but I believe maybe we limit ourselves on expenditures a little too much for lack of foresight into our future. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good comment. So I think I'm just kind of scanning through these flood risk concerns from the second slide that y'all filled out with Rachel, and I'm trying to see if there's anything on here that we haven't already kind of addressed in the root causes that we've already considered. I think, I guess, let me know if you think there's some unique root causes in this group of concerns.
This is Chuck again. As you can see, all of these identified concerns start to revolve around the same causes. And to me, it really goes back to learning to live with water. And so within that, we've mentioned development and education and planning, and that's where it all is. And, I think it was RJ talked about, you could pay an ounce for prevention or, a pound for the cure. And it's really addressing things on the front end.
Okay.
Chuck is absolutely right. And this is kind of funny what I'm going to tell you. Do you realize that all great civilizations of the world grew around water and rivers? So when people say, well, we should not be living in these floodplains or whatever, that is not what history has told us. It's that, we just get attracted to water for many reasons. But
well, I can reiterate on something Dietmar said earlier, is that if you look at where the development has occurred, it's right on that I-10 US 190 corridor, and that's where when the hydrology or the geography has a significant change, where you come from the upland terrace areas and it meets the tidal estuary zones, and you've got this area where it gets flat. So when a large surge of water tends to hit that area with no slope, it's got to spread out somewhere. And then if it's meeting a storm surge, that just magnifies it. So it's part of who we are, really. This is what makes Louisiana, Louisiana.
Okay. Yeah, this is Margie. Like that, the difference is, when the early people came to Louisiana, they knew it was full of water, and they liked that because of a lot of fish and other things. But they also knew how to build their homes so that when the waters came up, they didn't flood, and that's what we lost. We lost that intelligence, that native intelligence that the early settlers had. And now we think we can cure everything through engineering by building retention ponds and dredging. And as we can well see, that hasn't worked, not nearly as well as the old-fashioned ideas.
They also realized that these natural flooding tendencies introduce nutrients into the soil and provide a good agricultural land.
Exactly.
So that's something that we've altered as well.
Yeah, and also that rivers that have snags and roots and everything are better for fish and other wildlife. And, so it gave them food, and so they were happy with that. What I hear so many times at meetings is people who have flooded saying, well, why don't they dredge out that whatever river, or bayou? And I say, the lake is higher at flood stage often than the rivers are. It's like, what do you think dredging is going to accomplish? There's nowhere for the water to go. And that's, I think, something that needs to be gotten across to people.
Yes. I mean, when the level of water is controlled by mean sea level, it's dredging doesn't really provide the benefit.
I'd like to add one other thing. Someone who loves this state for what it is, I think there's a great natural beauty there as well. It constitutes a large part of our heritage. And even though it's difficult to live there, there will always be fishermen, and others who just love that kind of environment that are going to go there. So I think there's a fundamental aesthetic quality of preserving all of this, and not just protecting ourselves, but preserving our heritage. I think for that reason that it should get grave attention. I think our forefathers came and they, as the lady said a moment ago, knew how to prevent damage from hurricanes. I assure you they did not completely. There are many that died because of all that, more than we get these days. However, with all due respect, we've gotten better at it. We just need to still do more to preserve and protect. That's all.
Yeah, well, the main thing is they didn't know hurricanes were coming either, so they weren't really prepared for the worst. But like down in Grand Isle, if you've ever done a historic tour of the old homes down in Grand Isle, I was astonished because the old homes have holes drilled in the corners of the house, of the rooms, and they have plugs that go in them. And when the water rises, the plugs would pop out and the water would come into the house, and the water would literally help hold the house in place. And then when it drained out, it would drain out, and then they'd replug it after things dried. And I thought, how brilliant. Brilliant technology. It's like they knew the water was going to rise sometimes, and they figured they let it work with them instead of against them.
And I guess if you let Mama take the water into her new furniture, that would work too. Not trying to be absurd here, but I think
No, but I'm just saying they thought of ways to try to live with the problems, you know?
technology is incredible. There are many stories about that kind of ingenuity, and I agree with that. I'm aware of that. Thank you.
Can I be
Kim,
heard?
just
Hello?
Yep.
Hello?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Ren. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I wanted to add a root cause. There are many, obviously. Some we can control and some of them are natural, but one of the root causes of a lot of our problems in Old Mandeville, and we're the pour point of your Huck shed, is politics. And if you don't have the will to enforce the codes that you have written, and we have 437 pages of codes, then you're going to have a problem. So you also need to look at who makes decisions and who influences decisions. So I find in many of our deliberations in P&Z, and with respect, I do take issue to earlier comment about the fact that our planning and zoning people don't have any background in science, hydrology, or law. My particular planning and zoning group is all engineers and lawyers. But I do think politics is something that needs to be looked at. For example, this morning, President Cooper, to his great credit, started thinking differently and rejected an 80,000 pavement project right on I-10 in the drug fulfillment center there. That's the kind of thing that we may have hit a change, and it would be good to know that. But remember the effect politics has had on decisions about zoning changes, who's going to get interfered with by the pesky ordinances that we've written. But our thorough and comprehensive plan is quite specific about our obligations to the landscape and the terrain and the natural systems of our town. But our enforcement of that is sadly lacking, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to add to that just a little bit. I think all of us are aware of our political malady in this lovely state. And I think all too often we get sidetracked for political needs and satisfaction. So one of the things that made me aware of our program and its vulnerability, I think we need to make some provision in the end of all of this planning that makes it not subject to political whims. If we can protect it, have changes only by those qualified. Otherwise, much of what we do will go away when we go away. And I think we need to be strong enough to try to prevent that and try to write it into whatever our planning is.
Okay.
So I think that refers to another aspect of culture that I've mentioned, and that's the culture in decision making.
Yeah, I hear you.
So we need to, again, it gets back to the education of the general citizenry of how all of this works, and to be able to affect those decision processes.
I agree.
And it goes back to as well, you know, are you going to cost somebody by, you know, maybe development is a little more expensive, or are you going to pay on the back end when you have $260 billion of damage to recover?
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most difficult things to convey to the general population.
I think most people don't
And
mind
it's-
paying insurance if they know they're protected, and it's kind of the same way in this.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left, and I know we need to move on to keep time. I think we have really had a good conversation here. Is there anything left, any root causes that anybody wants to share that they haven't had a chance to break into the conversation to share?
And Kim, there were some chats or some comments in the chat box, so I'll please know, folks, that I've recorded those. I will go ahead and name a couple of those. Want to develop cheap land because it's cheap because it floods. So to me, it sounds like maybe perhaps the risk cost of transfer or the transfer of that cost, not just developing standards and systems, but developing protocols for long-term sustained maintenance of those systems, resources, Subsidence meets lake level rise, meets anthropogenics. How do we address this mindset that is marketed, excuse me, as growth of the parish? Should we address this? Root cause is also relying on the minimum FEMA standards and not using the most up-to-date data concerning flood elevations. We need higher standards to address our flood issues. Let me see. We've captured that. We need a long-term plan to move peoples inland. And I think those are all of the ones that came from the chat box. Are there any last-minute ones before we move on, y'all?
Did you already copy those over, Rachel?
I have them copied over into a Word document. I just need to transfer them into the other slides. Perfect. For the sake of time, y'all, we are gonna go ahead and move on. And Kim, if it's okay if I share my screen.
Yeah, let me stop sharing.
Thank you. So that was a really robust discussion, and I want to make sure that we're keeping to the end part of our agenda here. So in terms of next steps, y'all, we do have all of the root causes that were brought out. Essentially copy and paste it into these slides, but we're going to start discussing potential solutions through these lenses. So we will pick up where we left off during our conversation on the 23rd and start to discuss this, as well as what Alex had mentioned earlier, that more robust briefing book that talks about the region or the entities that exist within our region, and what they do and don't do. And so from there, we'll start to go into really kind of thinking longer term about what does this work look like? So that's where we'll go to next time. Let me pull up the correct presentation here for us to continue on our way. We are going to officially open the public comment period. We will keep 10 minutes for this as promised. So if anybody has public comments to make, you can do so in the chat box, or you can take yourself off mute. And we do ask that you limit your comment to about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes or less, just so that we can give people time.
Is this appropriate time for me or another time?
Go ahead, RJ, this is it.
I think the flooding problem that we have is immense, and I think perhaps we've made great progress. I want to talk about that and also hurricanes briefly, because both constitute major flooding causes. In terms of the detail and the looking in the Amite River Basin, I think that the Water Institute was a great established organization. I think one of its objectives was the assurance that we will not encounter another 2016 great flood. DOTD has been working for years on a Darlington reservoir, and it's a fine engineering structure. However, the area below Darlington, between that and Watson, would still allow that 2016 flood to occur and greater. My proposition is that we can talk about at some later time, if you will. I can show you a map if you prefer, that there are weirs that can be established in conjunction with Darlington that run down the Amite and will provide better protection for our people, and I really believe would be less expensive. Shall I show you a map of that, or shall we leave it at that verbal discussion? I think a map would help.
I'll toss that. What do our chair and co-chair, Ross and Chuck?
I'm sorry, what?
I was throwing it over to the chair and co-chair, Ross and Chuck. What do y'all think?
Oh, do we have any hands raised for anybody else to make public comment at this time? Or if you do want to make a comment, please use your participant raise hand function. So that way we can make sure we get everybody able to make comments.
Does that mean I can share it?
So that kind of dictates how much time that we're going to allow you, is what I'm saying.
Well, Oh, you want me to wait till you decide or what?
Keep going. As far as sharing, I don't have an option. I don't have, problem with it at this time, but you may be cut off, just as
All
other
right.
people raise hands.
Let's see if we can do this. Okay, it's
Do
not.
you need to share a screen?
Yes.
Hover down here.
Okay, I'm gonna enable that now.
Hover on the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Okay, Mr. RJ, you should be good to go.
Okay.
Select that and share.
What you see before you is a line drawing of the Amite River Basin below Darlington. And I think I'm getting a little difficulty making this thing work, so stand by. Okay, this is the basin, this is Darlington, this is Denham Springs, this is the Amite River and the Comite River, and they converge here. The Darlington has a great facility for retaining water, but between there and Watson, an area of that basin of 300 to 400 square miles is left unregulated. We could do better to protect our people of Watson if we could do better than that. And I think what we've got, this is simply a population density, and all it shows is right now all we have is a Comite Diversion Canal. This is the area where Denham Springs is. Look at the next figure and we will see. I don't know why this is so slow. Maybe it didn't get its second cup of coffee. This is Darlington again, the same figure, but these are 3 phases, 1, 2, and 3, that would be placed here just above Watson, and they would provide a greater capacity to protect flooding coming down from Darlington. It'll stop whatever Darlington Reservoir would, but all of this large area would also be regulated. That's the proposition. I think what we need to do is we need to model this structure just like we did with Darlington to assure ourselves that where we're going is proper. My sense is that this will show to be a superior flood control. If it is, then I think we will be able to make appropriate shifts. If not, we, I think, remain vulnerable in the future for flooding and also lawsuits. So that's the end of that sharing. The other thing I would just do verbally, briefly. We've talked about hurricanes, and Louisiana is so low that that is our great threat. I have a program that we could work out for discussion that will reduce the intensity of hurricanes. This objective is to protect our people, not to do anything for me particularly, but it'll reduce the intensity of that storm so that you'll reduce the forces. Say a 50% reduction in velocity of that storm would cut 3/4 of the forces of destruction along the coast. It'll also reduce tidal increases, which are growing in time, and it'll increase with the global heating that's going on in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to bite us hard. This is too big for Louisiana. What I'd like to do is institute discussions that would allow Louisiana to form a consortium of Gulf of Mexico states that would put together a program to look into this. I think the Gulf of Mexico people are going to need this in the future if we're going to survive.
Mr. Soche, that sounds great. I'm gonna have to stop you at this time, but if you would email that information to Rachel and she can farm it out to the group, we can definitely discuss it at a later time.
I'll talk to her about it. Yeah.
Sure, sounds great. And I believe Matthew Allen may be up next.
Oh, thank you, Ross. Yeah, just I wanted to point out that everybody seems to agree that the preservation of the floodplains are important for not increasing future floods for a given scenario. But one of the problems is that we have is all the individual landowners have their own agendas and what they want to do with their land. Now, there are some organizations like Land Trust of Louisiana, they're trying to purchase land to preserve it or enter into conservation servitudes and stuff. a lot of landowners who want to preserve it are adverse to those ideas because they want to keep control of their own land. And but they still want to preserve the floodplains for everybody. And we're talking some of these landowners are thousands of acres. Is there any way we could push for possibly tax credits for preserving floodplains for landowners? And I think they would be more attuned to preserving it like that, instead of trying to hand it over to a land trust or putting deed restrictions or something like that on. And might be something we can look at legislatively or politically to push on to help preserve what's left of our existing floodplains.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And we do have one more hand raised. I think it was Ren Clark. And this will be the last comment for the day.
Yes, it would be really cool, and this is a micro issue, but it would be really cool if you all, as the Watershed Initiative, could somehow get all of the surveyors who are out every day with doing static surveys, opus correction with the latest RTK technology, to submit their coordinates, X and Y and Z, to a repository that you all maintain. And you keep it, you keep it anonymous, but it would help us continue to refine our understanding of the landscape by getting the most accurate measurements we can get of the terrain. We're blessed with LIDAR. It's the most amazing thing that's out there, but it still has an error budget that exceeds a static survey point. And you've got hundreds of surveyors out there every minute of every day taking measurements of the land. It would be great if we could consolidate all of that to refine our understanding. And it's a micro point, but I think it's something that's very important, because I was working with the head of Louisiana Surveyors, a fellow named Stephen Longlinay. He's a professor at ULala. And he said, you know, we surveyors have always been really, really good at X and Y, but we've been terrible at Z. Well, everything we talk about in all these meetings, whether it's at my P&Z meeting or this global group of the deal, is about Z. The whole issue is Z. There are things we can do about it and things that we can just observe and react to, but we need to understand Z better, because if you can measure it, you can manage it, the old saw. But I wish y'all would find a way to capture what the survey community is collecting. Thanks.
Thanks, Ren, and thank you for everybody for all of your comments. We are going to move on here, and I'm going to try to keep my promise to keep us to 11:30. So I'm going to fly through this slide very quickly, and then we'll need to move to adopt some meeting minutes here. So we are here right now. We had our root cause risk analysis discussion. We will, in September, the next meeting, be finishing up this root cause discussion, and we're also going to talk about organizations and scales of decision making, as well as social network analysis work that our friends at LSU have been conducting, so that we can then start to begin to identify what are the stakeholder discussions that we need. I will send out these slides post-meeting to everybody, and this video presentation will also be online on our website, and the slide deck will be on the website too. So please know that this will not be the last time you see this slide. There will be changes made throughout the time that we spend together, just to make sure that we are adaptively managing as well. So apologies for not spending a lot of time on that slide. To just mention the upcoming meeting, we will finish the root cause and solutions workshop that we started today. And we'll also be talking about organization structure and scales of decision making. Just a reminder to fill out the project inventory if you have not already. Those links are online at crpcla.org. All right, and I know that our chair in particular has a hard stop for 11:30. So Chuck and Ross, if y'all want to take us through the adoption of our July meeting minutes.
Do I have a motion? Great. Perfect. Need a second.
I second. Bridget.
Thank you. All in favor?
Wait, that was me that started it. Can I do it?
Yeah, you can do it.
I can say I didn't know if I can make say I vote to adopt them.
Yeah, you made the motion. Bridget will be second, and as far as I hear, no objections.
That's it.
Sounds good. That's done.
All right, sounds like it carries. So just a couple of reminders. We have a meeting on September 23rd from 9 to 11:30. We have one October 28th from 9 to 11:30 as well. We will be sending out an action memo from this document or from this conversation that will build on the action memo that we sent out ahead of time. As always, you can find more information at both of these websites, crtcla.org for more information on Region 7 and watershed.la.gov for more information on the Watershed Initiative as a whole. Anything else?
I always like to thank.
Thanks, everybody. It was a lot of good, robust discussion.
Yeah, I always like to thank Rachel, Kim, Evelyn, Alex, whoever else I missed. I apologize, but it's a great team and we appreciate their work. Chuck, any last comments?
No,
Y'all,
I just want to say thanks to the team.
I do see one hand raised real quick, y'all, for Miss Margie Bickner Prey, and just want to remind y'all to make a motion to adjourn when you're ready.
Yes. So, Margie, is that a quick comment? Maybe it was.
No, it was a mistake. I was making a chat thing and I didn't realize I hit the hand up. I just wanted to say thank y'all for a great meeting.
Thank you. All right, motion to adjourn. Oh, excuse me. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
So Chuck and then Devin with the second. I'm sorry I didn't recognize the phone number to call out the person who had made the motion right before Chuck, so I didn't have a name, but Chuck made a motion and I have Devin with a second. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chuck and Major motioned.
Okay. Major, you made the motion?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, and then Devin with the second?
That's right.
All right, we're good. Anybody opposed? Hearing none. Thank y'all very much. See y'all next time.
Thank y'all. Have a fabulous week. Bye.
Take care.
Thank y'all.
Okay, y'all, I am stopping recording and closing down the Zoom. Thanks so much, y'all.